Okay, we now move to First Minister's questions. Question number 1, Joanne Lamont.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what engagements he has planned for the rest of the day.
First Minister.
Engagements to take forward the Government's programme for Scotland.
Joanne Lamont.
Excellent. Writing in The Guardian, the First Minister's former head of policy, Alex Bell, the man charged with writing the White Paper until as recently as July of this year, says of the nationalist movement Alex-Salmond leads, and I quote, "At its worst, it succumbs to the temptation to focus on old songs and tired policies. In this, Alex-Salmond is wrong." Mr Bell goes on to suggest that he had difficulty writing the Government's White Paper on independence because the First Minister's arguments are false. He says of the task of writing it, "Had the superficial elements of the independence argument been true, this would have been easy." Is the First Minister's former head of policy right? And if not, why not?
First Minister.
Well, I have to update Joanne Lamont. I saw Alex Bell on Newsnight Scotland last night, and he was saying what a wonderful person I was. I was most gratified. Of course, in terms of the article in the Guardian, then I agreed with a huge amount that was in it. I thought Alex represented his arguments properly when he said, for many of us, the nationalist case represents what the Labour Party could be if it had a spine. Now, I have to say, Alex, I think, is being a bit aggressive towards the Labour Party, but yes, I think basically the Scottish population would regard the Labour Party, UK Scottish Labour, and say it's a shiver looking for a spine to run up.
Joanne Lamont.
Well, that was stunning. The dispute is not whether the First Minister is a wonderful person or not. It's whether he's right or wrong. And for a supporter of independence to attack the Labour Party is perhaps expected. But if Alex Bell was the man the First Minister chose to write the blueprint for an independent Scotland, then I think it's a serious matter to hear his views. Because the future of Scotland is supposed to hang on the First Minister's long-awaited White Paper. We deserve to know why the man who was writing it left the government. Now, here's a clue. Mr Bell writes, "Salmond has denied a crucial truth about the debate. Scotland's problems are common to the developed world." If the First Minister cannot persuade those he hired to advise him of his case for independence, what chance does he have with the rest of us?
First Minister.
I pointed out to Joanne Lamont that last night's interview, Alex Bell confirmed a range of things, including that he's a keen supporter of an independent Scotland. Can I say to Joanne Lamont, this argument, well, I've got to say that is a decision that each and every one of us in Scotland is going to be asked to make. But I mean, Joanne Lamont's idea that everybody in political parties always has the same agreement, or should have the same agreement, is quite a fantastic one. I mean, I've been looking at some of the things that have been said about the Labour Party, like the Sunday Herald of the 30th of June 2013. Labour's finance spokesman Ken McIntosh was dropped in Joanne Lamont's reshuffle because he dared to criticise her infamous speech about Scotland's something-for-nothing culture. Well, I can say absolutely that I didn't. Alex Bell last night made it absolutely clear that he's voting yes in the referendum. We don't know whether Ken McIntosh has succeeded in knocking Joanne Lamont off her something-for-nothing culture.
Joanne Lamont.
Only in the First Minister's world is when somebody says Alex-Salmond is wrong, Alex-Salmond thinks he's saying Alex-Salmond is right. Because the reality is, Alex Bell may be supporting independence, but actually he agrees with me that we should be addressing the long-term problems like pensions and an ageing population. But he lost that argument with a First Minister who always and ever puts his own interests ahead of the interests of the people of Scotland. Now, if Alex Bell was a one-off, we could understand, but the First Minister has got form. What did his Nobel laureate adviser, Professor Joseph Stiglitz, say of his corporation tax plans? He said, some of you have been told that lowering tax rates on corporations will lead to more investment. The fact is that's not true. Or what about his old economic adviser, Professor John Kay? He described the First Minister's claims, and I quote, cloud cuckoo land. Does the First Minister ever reflect? Well, we know that nobody on the back benches is ever going to say the words, Alex-Salmond is wrong. Somebody else has to say it for you. Does the First Minister ever reflect that perhaps it's not his advisers who are wrong, it is he who is wrong?
First Minister.
The evidence is, if somebody says in Joanne Lamont's cabinet, shadow cabinet, they're wrong, they end up on the back benches. if I stay and do it, I really do commend. I commend. Well, sometimes, of course, they return. Are right at the back benches in some indications. I really do commend Joanne Lamont to read the transcript of what Alec Bell had to say in Newsnight Scotland last night. I mean, I'm not going to read it out because it's too glowing in its praise. Well,
just give us a flavour, First Minister.
It's been an immense privilege to work for the Government of Scotland. We have done some fantastic things. Alex-Salmond has won a series of elections. But I also think there is no fallout. We are much closer than we were when we first worked. There's a lot of compassion there. I felt it was just not going to be the argument I would make. I should step aside. Now, I have to say, in the terms of people gracefully stepping aside for government, Alec Bell is a paragon of virtue and should not be used by Joanne Lamont to suggest that he is anything other than a keen supporter of the Yes campaign and Scottish independence.
Joanne Lamont.
Presumably, when the rest of Scotland is now disagreeing with Alex-Salmond, it gives him some comfort to read out nice words about himself. Perhaps, however, he should really take things a little more seriously and reflect on what Alec Bell actually says, because people across Scotland are finding the First Minister increasingly deluded and unconvincing. Now, no wonder the First Minister's old deputy, Jim Siller, says of the SNP, totalitarian would be a fair description of Scotland's majority party. And totalitarianism does involve shouting people down. On a host of issues, important to the public that will have to be answered in coming debates on independence, the evidence is that no serious work has been done. Those willing to be told to shut up seem happy to follow whatever line is laid down for them. Today, the Institute for Fiscal Studies said that the First Minister has a £5.9 billion black hole in his finances, something he ignored when John Swinney pointed that out to him in private months ago. Isn't it true that the people of Scotland don't believe what he says about independence, and even his own side don't believe him anymore?
First Minister.
Well, firstly, just correction on the Institute of Fiscal Studies. They ran a range of scenarios. I suggest she looks at page 8. However, if North Sea revenues turn out to be substantially stronger than the OBR forecast, the fiscal situation in Scotland will actually be stronger than that of the UK as a whole for the first few years of Scottish independence. The one thing I would say about the scenarios which show the fiscal position stronger is actually the oil price figures taken from the Department of Energy and Climate Change. So they were London-based forecasts as well. But I thought it was very fair-minded in terms of the David Phillips and the senior economist IFS this morning on the radio. And I do think Joanne Lamont should quote them properly and in the full context. But on the question of trust, which is what Joanne Lamont's key question is, we now have considerable evidence because the YouGov poll on trust about what people say about independence was asked this very morning. Now, I have to say that no politician emerges dramatically as being incredibly trustworthy. Well, that's perhaps not surprising. I do top the poll, but nonetheless, nobody emerges unambiguously. But I suppose what's really interesting about Joanne Lamont's figures it's not only that the total trust figure, according to this YouGov poll, which the No campaign have been citing, our total trust is 16%. In the total trust on the constitutional question of 16% as an opposition leader in Scotland. Now, of course, that might be because a majority of the poll, according to this poll, are going to vote Scottish National Party. But then, of course, we can look at the Labour Party. This is her own supporters. And the question asked, do Labour supporters trust Joanne Lamont on the constitutional question? A majority of Labour supporters, 44%, don't trust the Labour leader on what she's got to do in independence. So if we're in a situation, according to this indication, that even Labour supporters in Scotland don't trust the Labour leader, then it's hardly surprising that those of us who are arguing for a positive future in Scotland look forward very optimistically to the campaign over the next year.
Question 2, Ruth Davidson.
To ask the First Minister when he'll next meet the Prime Minister.
First
No
Minister.
plans in the near future.
Ruth Davidson.
Presiding Officer, I'd like to take us back to the Institute for Fiscal Studies report, which the First Minister says we should quote them properly and in the full context. On page 8 of the report, yes, they did say the words that the First Minister read out, but the very next line was, but doing this might be ill-advised. So let's quote them properly and in the full context. And it doesn't get us away.
Order. Order. Let's hear Ms Davidson, please.
And it doesn't get us away from the central projection, which is that an independent Scotland would start off life with a £5.9 billion black hole in its finances over the first 2 years. So to continue the theme, I'll ask the First Minister, is the IFS wrong?
First Minister.
Well, I'm not going to let Ruth Davidson away with that, unfortunately for her, because I've got the full quotation here. It says, in that case, an independent Scotland would in principle be able to cut spending or increase taxes by less than if it remained part of the UK. And then it goes on to say that might be ill-advised because it might be better to borrow less or to save more. Only in the topsy-turvy world of the Conservative Party could, on that scenario, a fiscal advantage be presented as a weakness. So I really do think it wasn't a great start in quoting the IFS to stop before she put her remarks into context. So when she asks her second question, will she just confirm that what I've said about the quote in page 8 is absolute? Well, read out the full quote. The bit about how it says it might be wiser to take that stronger fiscal position instead of spending more than we'll be able to do in the UK or cutting less than we'll be able to do if we stay in the UK, to invest for the future or to borrow less. Read out the full quote and then we'll answer the second question.
Ruth Davidson.
And
Order.
in terms of answering the question, once again the First Minister chooses to pick one scenario and ignore the central projection of the IFS, which is a £5.9 billion black hole in the finances. But, Presiding Officer, it's not just the IFS that he wants to show a shiny thing in the corner and lead us away from. This week, we've also had the National Institute of Social and Economic Research. They follow on from the independent OBR, the CPPR, the Institute of Chartered Accountants for Scotland, CBI Scotland, named experts such as Professor Brian Quinn, Professor John Kay, the British Insurance Brokers Association and the David Hume Institute. All of these organisations raising questions over the First Minister's economic case for independence. All experts in their field, none with an axe to grind, but they have been dismissed, disparaged or ignored by this First Minister. Dismissed, disparaged or ignored. And they shouldn't feel special because we've just heard he does that to their closest advisers, Alex Bell. The First Minister may stand here today and he may say, I'm a wonderful person, but there is a really unpleasant picture building up here of a bunker mentality, of a man who refuses to be challenged, who refuses to take advice, who refuses to engage at all. How can it be, Presiding Officer, how can it be that all of these experts just don't get it but the First Minister alone is always right.
First Minister.
I think everyone knows why you didn't want to read out the rest of the quote. And all these things that I'm meant to do to experts, well, I think given you started by not giving the full quote, perhaps misquoting one of the reports, I think is rather an unfortunate way to make the case. I think we should do virtually. I thought the summary from David Phillips this morning was very fair-minded. He says, of course, that they took the OBR projections. And we've discussed before what I think are wrong with the OBR projections. They forecast an oil price which is lower than everybody else and substantially lower than the Department of Energy and Climate Change, which gives you the alternative figures. But of course we can forecast as much as we like, but we know what actually happened over the last few years. We know that between 1980 and 2011, Scotland ran an average annual net fiscal surplus equivalent to 0.5% of GDP, while the UK ran a deficit of 3%. And we also know that, according to the Institute of Fiscal Studies, that since 2000, Scotland's public finances have estimated to be somewhat stronger than those of the UK. Now, these are the things which have actually happened. And in that entire period of history, the Conservative Party never once was prepared to acknowledge that year after year through that period that Scotland was in relative surplus with the rest of the United Kingdom, that we could have invested more or borrowed less or saved more according to that fiscal position. So why on earth should we accept now from the Conservative Party forecasts about the future? And two final things. One, I wouldn't rely too much on the OBR. The OBR is forecasting that the UK will be in fiscal deficit for the next 50 years. Yes. If Ruth Davidson wants to accept the forecasts of the OBR. And as far as people showing loyalty, the remarks in the Scotsman, the 23rd of May, from Murdo Fraser, the Scottish Tory party, in its current manifestation, is not the best vehicle for its supporters trapped in a vicious cycle of declining electoral support. That is a Tory MSP. And you have to say, if you're not even prepared to read out a quotation which you introduced, it's hardly surprising.
We've got a constituency question from Kenneth Gibson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, you'll be aware that the Z Hinchcliffe and Sons Limited factory in Dorrye in my constituency is set to close. Z Hinchcliffe was founded in 1776 and produces quality yarn sought after by some of the most prestigious fashion houses in the world. Sadly, the company feels it now has too much capacity for its market. Whilst a few employees will be offered a transfer to Denbighdale and Huddersfield, Dorrye closure will lead to the loss of up to 115 jobs. Will the First Minister ensure the Scottish Government works with the directors of Z Hinchcliffe and Sons to offer any assistance it can to both mitigate potential job losses and assist those employees whose jobs are under threat?
First Minister.
Well, I share the member's concern that the developments in respect of Z Hinchcliffe and Sons and the impact, of course, this will have on the employees affected, their families and the surrounding area of North Ayrshire. I can confirm that we received notification of these redundancies yesterday, and we took immediate action through the Partnership Action for Continuing Employment, the PACE team initiative. Contacted the company to offer support for any individuals facing redundancy. I can also confirm that our agencies will seek to meet with the company to discuss what assistance we can provide to support and to prevent, hopefully, some or all of these redundancies. We'll do our absolute best, and I hope this provides reassurance to the member. We'll do everything we can to support the company and to support employees.
Question number 3, Dennis Robertson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister, what will the economic impact be for Scotland on the privatisation of Royal Mail? First Minister.
Well, I think the economic impacts, well, I hear none from the Conservative or Liberal members. I think they're deeply out of touch with the feelings of people, particularly the feelings of people in rural Scotland. Because the economic impacts of this privatisation are potentially grave. A privatised service will be more concerned with increasing profits and delivering services and could damage Scotland, where the Royal Mail is the lifeblood of rural communities. Royal Mail is a shared asset which belongs to Scotland as much as the rest of the UK, and therefore I've written to the Prime Minister asking him to place a moratorium on the sale of the Royal Mail until after next year's referendum. No one should be able to prejudge the decision of the people of Scotland on who should be given the opportunity to decide what we should do with a huge and important national asset.
Dennis Robertson.
Of course, the threat to the Royal Mail has been there by consecutive governments, Westminster governments. Will the First Minister confirm that after the yes vote in 2014, he will ensure that Royal Mail remains part of an independent Scotland?
First Minister.
Well, Dennis Robertson is absolutely correct. I think the defence of Peter Mandelson and Alistair Darling was that they were only planning a part privatisation of the Royal Mail as opposed to a full privatisation. They were half Tories as opposed to full Tories. But I think this position gets to the nub of why Scotland needs independence. There was an overwhelming majority of Scotland's MPs at Westminster opposed to the sell-off of the Royal Mail. We are still faced with privatisation. It illustrates perfectly why important decisions about the future of the country, such as a cherished postal service, should be taken by the people who care most about Scotland. That is, people who choose to work and live here. And that is why we should make every possible endeavour, and that's what we'll do in an independent Scotland, to keep our Royal Mail in public hands.
Lewis MacDonald.
I thank you very much. In the event that the Tory government does indeed, regrettably, privatise Royal Mail, and in the event of a yes vote in the referendum, will it be the SNP's policy to renationalise Royal Mail? First
Minister.
Firstly, get the moratorium. Second, try to stop it, and we'll seek to bring the Royal Mail back into public hands. And that answer is in sharp contrast to anything we've heard from the Labour Party at UK level, not to mention the extraordinary extrapolations and muddle over the question of the bedroom tax. So perhaps the member for North East Scotland will take a lesson in trying to bring forward into policy what he says he believes in terms of his politics.
Gavin Brown.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. It's a sad day when the First Minister can't even give clear answers to his own backbenchers on questions. For the third time, Presiding Officer, is there a clear commitment from this First Minister to renationalise, and I emphasise the word renationalise, the Royal Mail?
First Minister.
For the third time, an independent Scottish Government that I lead, because it will be a decision of the Scottish people, will bring the Royal Mail, our postal service, back into public ownership.
Question number 4, Stuart McMillan. Number 4. Order. Order. Question number 4, Stuart McMillan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Let's hear the member.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister how the Scottish Government will spend the £20 million that it announced on the 11th of September 2013 to help people affected by the so-called bedroom tax.
First Minister.
Well, the Government will provide local authorities with up to £20 million to enable them to increase their discretionary housing payment budget. That brings the total budget available this year for discretionary housing payments to £35.3 million, the maximum allowed under the powers of this Parliament. The additional money from the Scottish Government will be distributed to local authorities, with the exact amounts for each authority to be agreed with our partners in COSLA. What we know is this will give councils the ability to help many thousands of households hit by the tax.
Stuart McMillan.
I thank the First Minister for the response and for indicating his clear position on certainly on the issue of the bedroom tax, certainly for next year. But can the First Minister indicate what further discussions or communications the Scottish Government have had with COSLA to ensure that the £20 million will be utilised as timiously as possible to help those affected by the parties in the No campaign's bedroom tax? And has he had any discussions with Joanne Lamont regarding her position on the bedroom tax?
First Minister.
We'll work very closely with COSLA to ensure the money is used as quickly as effectively possible. I'm not sure that speaking to Joanne Lamont on her position on the bedroom tax is going to get much information, given that when 2 weeks ago, when her deputy said the Labour Party would abolish it tomorrow, Joanne Lamont refused to answer on the other television station. And then we had the remarkable incident of Jackie Baillie at the weekend, who said that Labour were about to announce plans to abolish the bedroom tax, only to be said by the Labour Party in London, this goes against what we are saying. So maybe it's a case of Jackie Baillie says aye, Labour says no, and Joanne Lamont says maybe's aye, maybe's no.
Jackie Baillie.
Thank you.
I
know the First Minister is indeed very fond of pointing a finger at others as a diversion, rather than addressing the powers that the Scottish Government have now. But let's try again. The First Minister will be aware that £20 million represents less than half of what's required, and there is no budget set aside for next year. Does he agree with his Deputy First Minister, currently whispering in his ear, who has refused to support a bill protecting people from evictions because she says it's not necessary? And is he confident that there are no cases in our courts this week that commence the process of eviction due to bedroom tax arrears?
First Minister.
The money we're provided is the maximum we can do under the law as it stands at the present moment. Secondly, the only cases that I've heard of councils trying to evict people in the bedroom tax have been North Lanarkshire and the Labour Party. And thirdly, Jackie Baillie, after her extraordinary performance this weekend, only to be contradicted by the UK Labour Party, has an unremitted gall coming to this chamber and asking questions, giving the pyrotechnics of the Labour Party over the last few days. So I do hope that we can anticipate a clear commitment from the Labour Party to abolish the bedroom tax. And I hope we can have a clear commitment from the Labour Party against evictions, like SNP councils did 6 months ago, and like the SNP in terms of repealing the bedroom tax, as we've pointed out, is one of the great arguments for having an independent Scotland.
Question number 5, Graham Pearson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what the Scottish Government considers the impact will be on local policing of reported plans to replace local police officers with officers from other divisions on public holiday to avoid double time payment.
First Minister.
Well, redeploying police officers according to operational need is not a new development across Scotland. For example, former Strathclyde Police Force regularly redeployed officers from outlying areas to the city centre when needed. No negative impact is expected as a result of the redeployment. The operational baseline of divisions will be maintained, and only officers above that baseline will be deployed to other areas to supplement local officers where necessary. That will ensure we continue to provide visible policing in our local communities while delivering a more effective and efficient police service across Scotland.
Graham Pearson.
I thank the First Minister for that reply. The local council leader commented after discussions with the divisional commander that they were dealing with what he called "these are very difficult cuts." Will the First Minister consider taking alongside the Police Federation's concern about no prior discussions leading up to the development, the Chief Constable's expressed view in the Aberdeen Evening Express that he had insufficient budget to maintain police numbers, and Edinburgh City Council, Labour SNP and administration's decision to review its commitments to pay for current additional local police officers to patrol their city, no doubt to be followed by other local authorities, is the cornerstone of policing success in Scotland since 1800. The maintenance of local The maintenance of local communities policed by local police officers being abandoned as a result of the government's actions, in spite of repeated assurances that community policing will be delivered across Scotland's communities by a national police service.
First Minister.
Well, I think Graham Pearson has been very unfair to the Assistant Chief Constable Mike McCormack when he pointed out in the Courier, as an employer, Police Scotland is also committed to safeguarding the welfare of its officers and staff. utilising our resources from across the country to support operational requirement ensures locally based personnel are not required to work longer hours and allows them the opportunity to be released from duty on local public holidays wherever possible. There is a strong argument in what the Assistant Chief Constable has to say. But in terms of numbers of police officers, I think we can fairly assume, given Labour's positioning on this, that we have at least 1,000 more police officers in the streets and communities of Scotland now than we would have had if the Labour Party had been in power. So it's not once did they prepare to support. And in terms of terms and conditions of these officers, then any representative of the Police Federation will tell you that the decisions made by this government to protect officers against the changes taking place in England and Wales, not just in police numbers, but in police terms and conditions, place this country and our local communities in a hugely, hugely superior position to their colleagues south of the border. And Graham Pearson well knows that any serving officer will confirm that position.
Question number 6, Christian Allard.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister when a publicly accessible register of fishing quota allocation, holdings and transactions will be established.
First Minister.
Well, Scotland's fish quotas are an important national asset. The Government wants to see quotas in the hands of the active fishing industry, supporting its success and not held as a speculative asset. We are currently working to establish a publicly accessible register of quota holdings, which will be launched later this year. The register will bring much-needed transparency to the quota system.
Christian Allard.
Thank you for the answer, First Minister, and I shall take it first thing tomorrow morning to Peterhead Fish Market. Would the First Minister agree with me that successive Westminster governments have failed to protect the interests of Scotland's fishing industry, and that independence offers a far better deal for fishing communities in the North East and across Scotland?
First Minister.
Well, with independence, Scotland will have a direct say in fisheries negotiations and at last be in a position to negotiate the best deal for our fishermen, rather than Scottish fisheries interests being treated in the way they have been over the last quarter of a century and more. I'm not sure that members in this place know of the release under the 30-year rule of the infamous Civil Service memo, which pointed out in terms of the negotiations to enter in the common market with the Heath Government all these years ago, and I'll point out exactly, in terms of Britain's wider European interests, they, the Scottish fishermen, are expendable. That was what was written by a civil servant, and I have to say, if you look at the priority, the lack of it given to the fishing industry by Westminster in European negotiations over these years, then there is absolutely no doubt that Labour-Tory governments regarded fishing as expendable. In an independent Scotland, it will be one of the great natural resource industries of Scotland and defended properly.
That ends First Minister's questions. We now move to the members' debate. Members who are leaving the chamber should do so quickly and quietly.